So, hello, David. How you doing?
Doing well, brother Chris. Doing good. Glad to be here to do this video with you and talk about some of these things that you want to discuss.
Yeah, awesome. Well, have you noticed that, like in 1800s, there was a certain people who claimed they were certain people, but are not. But according to their own books, their encyclopedia and their book, they claim that they started to identify as Israel in 1800s. Right? We're not going to talk about that group. Let's talk about the fact that, especially over the last years, suddenly black people start to identify as Hebrews and as Egyptians. And let's take a look at history, what really going on, what the Bible says. I've seen you making over the last years some great videos on TikTok, but you probably noticed that it's a hard topic to talk about because how often has your channel been removed?
Probably 6 or 7 times, and then you have to use a filter after, because other channels are better than some, but TikTok, for the most part, you might as well forget it because it's governed.
Yeah, yeah, but I see you don't give up. That's good. So, but it's great that we can do this on YouTube because there's so much nonsense out there, identity theft, and let's go over some verses. Black people always use to make the claim that they were basically us in history,
Yeah.
right? So, in order to understand who are the people of the Bible, how are they actually described from the very beginning?
So when you're looking at the Bible, a good foundation that I've come across is when you're looking at Adam, right? God created Adam, and he breathed in the spirit of his spirit into Adam, and the Bible says he was made of the dust of the earth. And if you look at that word dust, it's Adomai, and that's where the word Adam is derived from, which is mean a red or a clay dirt. And the very word Adam itself means to emit redness, to blush, to be rosy, to show blood in the face. There's one particular people out of all the species or races upon the earth that are able to show blood in the face. And what this is called is hemoglobin, right? We have transparent skin, so we are able to show blood in the face, right? Uh, it also, another word is ruddy, right? We see that common theme through the Bible. David was ruddy, King Solomon was ruddy. The New English dictionaries say that the word ruddy is like having a healthy countenance, right? And you look healthy when you show blood in the face. Like, for instance, if you go out into the cold on a cold day, the cheeks become red because the blood vessels in our face, they expand and they push blood into our cheeks to help, it's oxidized blood to help not damage the tissue in our face. So Adam was a blushing, rosy man. And I think with that foundation of scripture, we can also identify other scriptures in the Bible.
Yeah, yes, indeed. You see King David. Everyone was portrayed as being ruddy, fair and ruddy. So, but over the last time, maybe decades, maybe 100 years, the scriptures they made it more humanistic, more politically correct. So
Yeah.
now you had this narrative of Noah had three sons, and those three sons represent the three main races: the Mongolians, the Africans, and the white people.
Yeah.
And that's kind of strange, isn't it? Because the Bible is speaking about the descendants of Adam. So how can the descendants of Adam become totally different races?
Yeah, it's basically it's preschool, right? Like when you go into the church and you have your class in the morning, that's what they teach the children, right? This Noah's Ark, and you see all those things. But when once you dive into it and you look at these things, it has to make sense, right? Noah was perfect in his generations or ancestries in Genesis 6 verse 9, and he had one wife. Her name was Namiah, and we read about her in the book of Jasher. And they had one son, Shem, Japheth, and Ham. It's nonsensical to think that you're going to have three different races of children, and they're going to go out and expand into to the uh, to the earth, right? And something that's worthy of note, right? Even like these Ethiopian Bibles, the Book of Enoch says that Noah was white with the same theme, and he was rosy, right? It's that same theme back to Adam in the garden.
Yeah, amen. Yeah. So the people of Japhet, the people of Shem, they were of the same race, right? These were Aryan European people. But then many make the claim that Ham was black, right? Because Cush was came from Ham, and Cush means black, right? What do you think about that? Could it have been referring to the black fertile soil where they lived?
Yeah, certainly. And my from what I've looked at and what I've studied, you spoke of the word Aryan, and that word Aryan, it's derived from where the ark landed, Mount Ararat, Aryan, meaning noble ones or farmer. Look at Adam again. Back to Adam. Adam was a cultivator. Us as a people have created the greatest agriculture the world has ever seen, hence the greatest civilizations following. But Ham, you can look at Egypt and you can find these red-headed mummies like Ramses, Thutmose, King Tut, even Yuya, which some believe is Joseph, right? But they try to debunk it because of the timeline. It's the best preserved mummy that there is. His name is Yuya. He has blonde hair and he has Caucasian features, just like Ramses, who has red hair, right? How do they explain these things away, right? Is basically they say their hair was dyed with henna or these other things, but when you look at the follicles, researchers look at the follicles, there were red-headed Egyptian mummies, and these, to my belief, were the sons of Ham, who later intermingled.
Yeah. Yeah, they even did a DNA test on Tutankhamun, and he carries R1b, which is
Yeah.
mostly found in Western European people, right?
hmm 50%, I think his DNA is 50% of Europe DNA, and 80% of British men is linked to King Tutankhamun, which
Yeah.
is super interesting.
So, so the problem is that um, the Middle East, Ethiopia, Egypt, North Africa, the way it is now, it is so heavily mixed over the last maybe 2000 years, maybe a little bit before. When you look at the DNA of these people, you can see there are many different haplogroups combined together, right?
Yeah.
So people assume that when they read the Bible stories about Cush or Egypt or the Middle East, they assume, well, they must have been brown or black because when you look at these regions now, they look brown, right?
Yeah.
But let us go thousands of years back today to biblical times. Was it the same in that period as today? And why black people make claims being the Hebrews, right? So before I go to Ethiopia and Egypt, let's go to the Israelites, the Hebrews, right? Were they black?
Uh, no, I mean, if you look at that time period, right, this is the problem that you have with these. What upsets me, because you have these modern groups today, and they have this ideology that the same people that are there today are the same people that was back then, as if demographics doesn't change over thousands and thousands of years. We can look at the scriptures, we can look at some DNA sources, um, we can look at for instance, I think it's Eliam. He has a channel, and he goes through and he goes through all these different burial sites of all these Hebrews who had blue eyes, blonde hair, blue eyes, brown hair, and just different Caucasoid peoples. But looking at Jacob, and I find this very interesting. If you look at Jacob, who was the father of the 12 tribes, his mother was Syrian, right? And if you look at Genesis 25, verse 20, it clearly says that she was a Syrian. If you look at Deuteronomy 26, verse 5, it says a Syrian went down into Egypt, right? So today in modern Syria, of course, you have a lot of Arab admixture that's happened over the years, but these Syrians, their DNA does not match that of those Arabs, right? This is common source material that you can find online, but their DNA is linked to those of the Caucasus farmer and the Anatolia, Turkey, and Mesopotamia, where we also find these blue-eyed Sumerian statues, which were another word is Akkadians, which means coming from the mountains. All these areas bordered where Noah's Ark landed: Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Caucasus. So the father of these tribes was Syrian, and the DNA backs it up. So I do not believe that they were anything other than us. You know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't think the Bible is about other people, right? And it has
No,
nothing to do with we don't like other people. Our point is our history, right? And it's so
amen,
important. And I think it's very
amen.
damaging if you uh, basically gaslight us into deny our own history, because it's not even that we have to deny history thousands of years ago, even recent history we have to now deny. Some even
Yeah,
make the claims that we only popped up, what, in the 1600s, 1800s, right?
yeah.
And now they come to the point that the blacks were the Vikings and the Greeks and
Shakespeare, King James. It's
yeah, it's
ridiculous.
getting further and further, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
but you were talking about that word atmu, right? Which means ruddy.
Mm.
So from Adam all the way through Scripture, everyone is called ruddy and fair, right? Which is not black, which is not any other race than white people, right? We see even the Lamentations where they speak about the Nazarites. They were purer than snow, whiter than milk. They were more ruddy in body than rubies. The polishing was of sapphire. This is describing a white man, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Also in the Songs of Solomon, which black people always use, uh, uh, my beloved is white and ruddy, right?
Mm-hmm.
In 7:14 we see, thy neck is as a tower of ivory, thine eyes are like as
Fish pools in
the
Heshbon.
fish pools, and I cannot even write my so fish pools or waters are blue, green,
Yeah,
blue, right?
blue and green. Yeah.
Because sub-Saharan African people always have black eyes. Though
Mm-hmm.
some may sometimes have lighter eyes because of mixing, right?
Yeah.
Real African has black eyes, very dark brown, right? So it is very clear in scripture, like you already explained what Adam means. So still, and I had it yesterday, black people insist that they were the Hebrews based on a few verses. And I want to ask you about these verses, right?
Sure.
Um, for example, they always use Song of Solomon 1:5. Can you talk about that?
Sure. If
I
I could,
was black, it says.
yeah, let me he laughs about it. Let me just read it real quick. I think I have that marked here. Let's see. Yes, I do. The marker. Just want to read that here. And looking at Song of Solomon, basically the Song of Solomon or Song of Songs in some Bibles, it's basically a set of poems, and it's the Shulamite woman. She's drawing on her experiences, right? She goes into dreams, right? When she describes Solomon in 5 verse 10, she describes him as white and ruddy. She describes his belly being of smooth ivory, right? And of course, I've heard, not to get off the verse here, but I've heard some black Hebrew Israelites say, "Oh, that's black ivory." From my research, there's no such thing as black
That's really
ivory, right?
reaching.
Yeah, it's elephant tooth. It's white, so it's ridiculous, right? And so that pushes on the point too of Song of Solomon 7 verse 4. Her neck was like ivory, right? It was white. But we'll get back to the point here. So looking at Song of Solomon 1 verse 5, she says, "I am black, but calmly, O you daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon." And then she says, "Look not upon me, because I am black." because the sun has looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me, and they made me a keeper of the vineyards. But my own vineyard have I not kept. Now, you can clearly see she says, look not upon me. So it seems that they're so proud of this verse, but from this perspective, she says, look not upon me. So is she ashamed of being black?
He was working
Right?
in the vineyard in the sun all day.
Yeah, the sun has touched me. And other versions, the Amplified says it was the sun, right? Or deeply tanned, right? So if you go into these translations and look, and that word, the New King James Version actually uses dark, right? Because of, and that word dark means swarthy. And I did save a picture. I just want to show that. Maybe you can see it.
Yeah,
Right, that's swarthy, right?
yeah,
That's not black, right? That's swarthy or dusky.
yeah.
So to go through and cherry pick verses like that, it's a shame. And if we skip to Song of Solomon 7 verse 4, which you mentioned, it's the same woman whose neck is ivory, which is white, and her eyes as fish pools, blue or green, right? So clearly, this is not a black woman, you know?
Yeah. Interestingly, when you look at Europe a few hundred years ago, they powdered the face with white powder and a white wig
Yeah.
because if you had a tent, a sun tent, you were considered a peasant.
Oh, yeah.
And the
Yeah.
royal class want to distinguish themselves not being a peasant that had to work in the sun all day. Yeah,
Yeah. So that's the same idea we have here. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It was the peasants who worked in the vineyard. And look, I'm all blackened now. Don't look
That's
upon me.
interesting.
Yeah. So basically, the Songs of Solomon, there's only a few verses, which is totally out of context.
Totally. Yeah. It's just that one that I know of, the I am black, but it's a cherry picked verse, and you never hear him quoting these other verses, right? They'll use word gymnastics to try to get around Song of Solomon 5, verse 10, which he says, my beloved is white and ruddy. She's having a dream, and she's describing Solomon. She says, white and ruddy. It goes back to Adam. Adam, who's able to show blood in the face, be ruddy, and he was white, just like King David in 1 Samuel 17, verse 1742, where King David is fair and ruddy. And that word fair, when you look into the King James dictionary, it means white. It says it clearly. I actually wrote it
Yeah,
down here somewhere, but it means white.
yeah, yeah. There's a different context to it. It can be fair in countenance, meaning your complexion, and
That's right.
can also mean handsome or pretty,
The
right?
the here it says clear. This is KJV Dictionary of Fair. Just I wrote down a little bit of it. It says clear, free from spots, free from dark hue, white as a fair skin, fair complexion, like you said.
Yeah, yeah. So they're basically grasping the.
Yeah, grasping for straws. Throwing mud on the wall, see if it'll stick, right?
Well, so even though with all that evidence, they, for example, go to Ethiopia and Kush. I want to go there as well. But by the way, I found Handel, the German English German composer in the 7th century. He wrote a song and it's called "The Arrival of the King of Sheba." Right? Now, why would a 17th century European man make a whole song, classical song concerning some black African,
Yeah.
right? So we're gonna go to the Queen of Sheba because there is so many um, claims made. For example, what would you say when you read the book of Daniel, where the Son of Man is described as having woolly hair? What would you say about that?
Well, first, he's called as the Son of Man, right? That's the first thing. And that word Son of Man means son of Adam. Back to Adam again, right? To be rosy, to show blood in the face. If we look at Ezekiel, Ezekiel was also called the Son of Man, the son of Adam. Psalms 8, verse 4, right? What is it that you think of man, or the son of man that you visiteth him, right? So there's different types of man. But to Adam, speaking, you're speaking of Revelation, right? Where
Yes, it is described in Revelation, but they don't like Revelation.
okay,
They use the from Daniel because in
well,
Revelation it's talking about white like wool, but they don't like that, so they go to Daniel where it says hair like
oh,
wool.
so the first thing that I would say, if you look where it says, I think it's the angel, is the angel described as being bronze? I think it is, or brass, or something along those lines. They take the book of Daniel and they equate it with the book of Revelation, and it's this terminology where I think it's the angel or one of the it is described as being brass. And if you, regardless, if you take brass,
Yeah,
right, and you put it next to a black man, brass is a yellowish color. It's not black, right? That's the first problem you have. It's like taking a penny and putting on a black person, even though it's made of copper. It's the same idea.
yeah,
It doesn't match, right? So to me, I've heard that this could mean judgment or other things, but I'm not 100% sure on Daniel. I'm a little bit more with Revelation. I understand that a little bit better.
yeah. In Revelation, it even says that Jesus' feet look like bronze as it has been is burned in the oven. In other words, if you melt brass in the oven, it becomes really bright like the
Yeah.
sun.
Like a
Right?
glowing white. Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing
And,
to do
and
with old oxidized copper or something.
and what they don't get is they'll say, look, his hair was wool. It doesn't say his hair was wool. It says his hair was white like wool,
Yeah,
right? Like meaning similar to the word before, white, right? The color of wool. His hair was white. This was the glorified Christ. And like you said, brass burning in a furnace, you can look at Google or whatnot where they're pulling the brass out, it's glowing white. And then the following verse, it says, his countenance as the sun in its strength in noonday. The sun in its strength in its noonday. If you look out, you have to put on sunglasses. It's a bright light, right? As this is the glorified Christ.
yeah. If you
So,
just have basic reading comprehension, and it says his hair was white like
like,
wool,
whoa. Well,
uh,
yeah,
there
it's
is
cherry
nothing
pick.
about his texture of his hair was
Yeah.
like wool,
And
right?
then you see these scary pictures that they put of this black god and these
The
AI
white hair,
photos and these,
yeah. As if Jesus is an aging black
yeah,
man,
yeah, yeah.
an 80-year-old black man.
Yeah,
His hair is all white.
pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so yeah, concerning the Israelites, besides that they are obviously not black. The Hebrews were not black. The Hebrews came from Eber, and Eber came from Noah, right? And there is no evidence whatsoever that sub-Saharan Africans came out of the Levant or out the Caucasus Mountains or Mount Ararat. There's nothing. But this is
Yeah.
where Eber came from, right? Eventually, from the sons of Noah. So besides the color, um, did in this case, because there are other groups who identify as Israel, but today we're talking about the black people. Do they have fulfilled any of the prophecies and promises made to Israel?
Well, see, they have this idea. They have to push everything forward, right? Like they are going to be a multitude of nations. That's the only way that it can work, right? Like
But it hasn't
Genesis.
happened yet.
Yep, it hasn't happened yet. They're waiting to become. They're waiting to become a multitude of nations. But for those who do not know, those Genesis 35, 10 and 11, Genesis 48, verse 19, the promise, and Isaac thy seed shall be called, and from your loins shall be a line of kings, and a nation and a company of nations. And as far as I know, it's only us who, no one else fulfills, not those in Israel today, not these Africans. No one fulfills these promises. A nation and a company of nations. And you think about Great Britain, Brit ish, right? Covenant man in Hebrew, Brit tan, covenant land in Hebrew. Great Britain owned the whole world besides 22 countries at one time. And what came out of Great Britain? Australia, the United States of America, etc., etc. A nation and a company of nations. And all of these
Yeah,
nations, what's so beautiful about it, carried Christianity dominantly.
Yeah. Even Spain, long before the Sephardic Jews even went there, was called Iberia.
Yeah.
Come
What
from
you mean?
Eber, the
Eber,
Eber.
yeah. hmm
Yeah.
To
So
cross over, right?
yeah.
Hebrew land.
So when they make the claim that they were the original Europeans, that comes from the idea, well, we must have been, the Hebrews must have been black. Spain was called Iberia, so the Europeans must have been black. That's their reasoning, right?
Yeah.
When you were talking about kings, I know at least one sub-Saharan African king was King Shaka Zulu. You think he was an Israelite?
Hell no. To be blunt, I mean, King
But
Shaka Zulu.
well, they tried to make the claim. Well, we had Mansa Musa. He was black, and he was
Yeah.
the richest man. But obviously, that is also easily debunked because Mansa Musa in northeast Africa, that kingdom was set up long before Islam was established, and these people were Arab,
Mm.
not sub-Saharan African. The problem is that the Arabs also went into the sub-Saharan African regions and forcibly converted them, took them as slaves, used them as servants in their armies, right? And eventually started to intermix. That's why most Arabs, brown Arabs nowadays, and I looked up dozens of DNA tests, which you can see on YouTube, and they all have for like 3 to 6, 10% sub-Saharan African DNA, right?
Wow. Yeah.
But they like to show that picture of Mansa Musa as a sub-Saharan African, but there are older drawings where he's depicted as a white man
I've seen those.
with red hair, because the early Arabs were still white. They came from the sons of Noah, right? Before
hmm
they started to mix. So also King Mansa Musa, no, he was sorry, black population, but he was not a black man. Even though we now go to that area, yeah, the white man is gone. It is all intermixed, and the people who live there look black, but they are mixed Arab, mixed black. So, right. So they have all these claims, but at the same time, they say, well, we were slaves in Egypt, and we were never freed. We never had our own land. Even now, 3,000, 4,000 years later, they are still slaves.
Yeah.
So, if you believe the Bible, I don't know if the Black Hebrew Israelites believe the New Testament, but it clearly says that the promised Messiah came and he reconciled already the tribes, right? And his kingdom started. So how
hmm
come if you believe in Jesus, how come that there is no reconciliation? That they were still hidden in West Africa? What do you think about that? Are they West Africans, or are the Israelites hiding in West Africa?
I just think that they're. I, I don't even think they actually believe what they believe, to be honest with you, because they have to reach. Everything they do is a reach, and there's no archaeological evidence of any migrations west. Right? We read uh, like Josephus. We read in Second Esdras, First Kings 14:15 says they went north. They went beyond the Euphrates, right, into Asia Minor, where Paul went. Right? Paul
Yeah.
went to all these groups. We read it in First Peter 1:1 to the dispersed.
But that's in the Levant, not in Africa.
Yeah. So where they're getting this from, they just have to reach for it basically. And I got into an argument with one, and he said that it makes no sense, right? Because he was quoting Second Esdras, which talks about the Lord who widening the path of the Euphrates for them to get through. But if they left out of Assyrian captivity, and we know, according to the census of David's army, there was t- at least, he said 20 million, right, in the census. If you count all the numbers, that's a lot. Josephus said they were innumerable in number, right? There were two tribes subject to the Romans, while the 10 tribes were past the Euphrates. So you have millions upon millions leaving Assyrian captivity. So he said that they were in boats. But why would they go backwards? It's nonsensical. Why would they go backwards? It doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and not
So
just backwards geographically, but also backwards in building cities and
Yeah,
technology.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They just woke up one day. It's like we bear the fruits. It anyone in their right mind can technically see we've carried the gospel. We carry the names Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul. Right? We've sent missionaries all over the world, controlled the seas. We're more numerous than the sands of the seashore. Hosea 1:10, and you look at Hosea 1:10. It already happened. It says that they would be declared the sons of God. We were already declared the sons
Through
of
Christ,
God.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. There is a popular picture going around of a map used by the Black Hebrew Israelites. It's in Africa, where it said, well, it says here the kingdom of Judah. So they say, see, we are the true Israelites. We had our own kingdom called Judah. But I've seen all the maps, and that place is not called the kingdom of Judah. It was a Portuguese colony. And the Portuguese called it the kingdom of Ayuda. Ayuda means help. But they took away
oh,
the A
see,
and kept
yeah.
the Judah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the
Unbelievable.
Portuguese who went there, set up the kingdom of Judah. Not it was not the Black Hebrew Israelite kingdom of Judah, right? So it is reaching, grasping for straws.
From what I've come to know, many of them are very dishonest, purpose on purpose, right? They
Yeah.
edit things out. If you're facing something with according to your own conscience, you have to deal with it and see what it is. And also their fruits, the way that some of them, that's just my personal opinion.
So now that we have basically established that the Hebrews and the Israelites were not sub-Saharan African, let's go a little bit more south. Because what the church has done, they made the Bible story more politically correct and more all inclusive. And they say that Noah, who was perfect from Adam, had three sons, right? One son was black, the other was Mongolian or brown Jewish, because Shem was Jewish. So I don't know where the Mongolians fit in there with the narrative. And then Japheth was white, right? So they say, well, Ham was black, Ham went south, therefore the Egyptians were black and the Ethiopians were black, and because they all came from Ham. But that kind of defeats the whole purpose of starting over with Noah, who was still perfect in his genealogy, the
Yeah.
genealogy of Adam, right? So it doesn't make any sense. But if you look at the Middle East today and North Africa today and Somalia and Ethiopia, right? Let's forget about Somalia now, but Ethiopia and Egypt. When you look now, these people are brown and black. Um, so they assume that these people have always looked that way in history. Let's talk about that a little bit, because what many people don't realize is that North Africa, all the way to Ethiopia, these were still there were still white people living there, right? So and we can prove that by looking at ancient writers who lived in that time and also Roman historici, right? You have found some quotes and parts of what the historians said about that place, right?
Yes. So this is a few things that I've found, and we have a Roman geographer from 43 A.D., and his name was Pompeius Mela, right? Choreographia. You can find that online, but he writes. Let me expand here. On those shores, washed by the Libyan Sea, however, are found the Libyan Egyptians, the white Ethiopians, right? And a populous and numerous nation, the Gaetuli, right? So he's clearly describing these Ethiopians as being white. Same thing with Herodotus, right? We already talked about the word fair, but it's but Herodotus, book 3, right, the father of history, chapters 20, he says these Ethiopians to whom Cambia sent them are said to be the tallest and fairest of all men, right? That sounds like white men to me. And also, you have like this old pottery that we have. It has King Cephas on it. He's a blonde haired, white Ethiopian king. But, today they want to turn it into mythology. But let me read this because there was different types of groups of Ethiopians. And that word Ethiopian, right, it means burnt face or land of the burnt face
Yeah.
people or so forth. But I like a lot of
Wait,
guys where it's
like
secular.
sunburned, right?
Yeah, sunburn. That's
I
right.
don't think black people are black because of a sunburn.
No, I haven't seen one, though. I did in Disneyland see a black mom putting sunscreen on her black kid. I'll throw that out there. I wanted to video it, but I didn't want her to see me doing it. But looking at Diodorus Siculus, right? I love some of his stuff because there's a lot of good stuff. He writes about the Israelites, and there's I love the extra biblical stuff. Of course, I love the Word of God and I like what's in the Scriptures, but the extra biblical stuff, right? It just elevates the Bible even more, right? But anyway, but Diodorus Siculus, his time period was anywhere between 60 and 30 BC before Christ. This is 3 verse 8, so I'm assuming chapter 3 verse 8 in his book, and it goes as such. But there are also a great many other tribes of the Ethiopians, some of them dwelling in the land, lying on both the banks of the Nile and on the islands and the rivers. Other Others inhabiting the neighboring country of the Arabia between the Nile and the Red Sea, and others residing in the interior of Libya, the rest of Africa, Sudan here. And he goes on to say, the majority of them, and especially those who dwell along the river, are black in color, have flat noses, and woolly hair. And for their spirit, they are entirely savage and display the nature of a wild beast, and are as far removed as possible from human kindness to one another, and cultivating none of the practices of civilized life. They present a striking contrast when considered in the light of our own customs. They didn't have to worry about being politically correct back then, did they?
Yeah. Well, I've seen a lot of quotes from Greek historians who call them the tallest and the fairest of all. They were very religious in worshiping the gods. They were masters in crafts and in music and in arts. That doesn't sound really like the black people that Theodorus described, doesn't it?
What not whatsoever, right?
Yeah. So there were obviously white Caucasian people living in North Africa, Ethiopia. And also Ethiopia was not that little country we have today. That whole region was called Ethiops by the Greeks.
Mm,
It's not just that little part we see now where all these people live. And also there's no such thing as a pure Ethiopian nowadays, right? Because you have very dark-skinned Ethiopians. And I even saw pictures of Ethiopians with very light skin, straight hair,
yeah,
blue
yeah.
eyes. So there
Mm,
was obviously mixing going on, right?
mhm.
So, but people assume, well, they have been unchanged for thousands of years. And interestingly enough, today I looked up some DNA results of Ethiopians. And some have a little bit of Somali, some have more Western African DNA, but many even carry the gene of the J haplogroup. And the J haplogroup are Caucasianoid people, right? Like
Yeah,
the actor Ben Affleck, he is haplogroup J. Well, Ben Affleck looks pretty white to me,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So the idea that Ham was black is, of course, not true, even though Ham did started to intermix along the way, right? But even Nimrod, the son of Cush, was still a white man. We can see the statues, we can see the descriptions, we can see all that, right? Even ancient Mesopotamia, you saw the pictures, remember? All these white people with blue eyes in the statues.
Yeah.
So, why do you think it's so hard to believe for people that Caucasoid people did live in the Middle East and North Africa?
I would say destroyed for a lack of knowledge, right? Because they look at modern demographics and they say that's what it is, that's what it always was, right? They say that nothing's changed, but when you dig in and you look, It's hard to deny, like you said, with the blue-eyed statues in Mesopotamia. You know, you had Mesopotamia, you had the Caucasus, Mount Ararat, where the ark landed. Ararat again, meaning Aryan noble ones, farmers. They migrated among the heathen nations. Right? We've touched every corner of the globe.
So it's obvious that Caucasian people lived in the Middle East, North Africa, Ethiopia. The Greek historians told us about. There are two kinds of people, the white civilized ones, and those who are totally different and basically has no connection with them. He describes them as black, woolly hair, flat-nosed, right? Even though people might find it offensive, but we're just quoting the historians who
Yeah.
lived in that time, right? Because the Greeks lived there, right? Greeks dominated that area. Also, Egypt, right? We even had Queen Cleopatra. She was Macedonian Greek, right?
Hmm.
So the Romans dominated, but even the Egyptians dominated, right? And you found a lot of pictures of these earliest, oldest mummies in Egypt. What did they look like?
So you look at Ramses, for instance. He looks like a causacoid. His nose is very prominent, but that's because his nose collapsed, and they put something up in his nose to give it structure. But all of these mummies, Thutmose, Ramses, King Tutankhamun, right? They all have causacoid features. Even Yuya, right? He had blonde hair. He's the best preserved mummy that there is. Some people believe that it's actually Joseph, right? But of course, they say the timeline doesn't fit. But even in the Bible, it talks about during the time of Joseph, it talks about the land of Ramses. And they try to debunk this as well, but we have the mummy of Ramses, and he's clearly Caucasoid, and he has red hair. They've looked at the hair follicles, and they can see that the hair follicles were red in the follicles. And of course, you have these black Hebrew Israelites. They say, uh, or these wannabes. They say that they use Gehenna or whatnot to dye their
Oh,
hair. But scientists have looked and see that the natural root of the hair follicle is red,
yeah,
right? So all these mummies, they carry the traits. They don't look Negro whatsoever. And the ones, I think a few of the mummies actually we have depictions of the Nubians were actually fan bearers. And you can see it on the wall where they had to
yeah,
fan the pharaoh, and they were buried with these pharaohs to serve them in the afterlife, to
yeah,
fan them.
yeah. Even the cats they mummified, right? They were
Yeah, King Tutankhamun, on his chest, in his tomb, it depicts him on a chariot, and he's wiping out all these Nubians with a
yeah,
sword, right?
yeah.
So,
Have you seen a picture of those slippers from Tutankhamun? There is a black Nubian,
yeah,
so he can threaten on his enemies with every
with
step he
every
takes.
step, he can step on them with every step. They're under his feet, right?
Yeah.
So,
But we do see along the way that Egypt became more and more multicultural, right? We have
yeah,
depictions of black Nubians. We have Caucasoid people with black hair, right? We have
yeah,
Caucasoid people with blonde hair. But even you talked about Ethiopia, which means the land of sunburned, right? We
yeah.
see that blonde hair people, they are depicted with very dark red, brown skin, even though they still have blonde hair. That just means that they were slaves working in the sun all day,
Mm,
right? Because
yep.
as far as I know, there are no sub-Saharan Africans with straight blonde hair.
No. Yeah. Even in the tombs, you have depictions of actual blonde-haired Egyptians in the tombs, right? Arthur Kemp in his book March of the Titans, and also he has a book. It's called The Story of Ra, I think it is, but it actually has depictions of blonde-haired Egyptians in these tombs.
Yeah. So we all know, we all heard Billy Graham preach, "You black men, don't you forget, it was a black man who helped Jesus carry the cross." So he was referring to Simon of Cyrene, right? So was Simon of Cyrene a black man? What does it even mean, Simon of Cyrene?
Cyrene was a Greek settlement, right? That's
Nee.
what it was. A Greek. It was a Greek settlement, right?
Yeah,
and and you have the same ideology. A lot of them hold on to the black eunuch, right? That Philip baptized. You have this black man coming in on a chariot speaking Greek, right, and wants to get baptized. It doesn't. No.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, sub-Saharan Africans never had any scrolls of Isaiah or any other scrolls of ancient scripture, right? Because it was Israelites who had that, right? And in my research, I found that the Ethiopian eunuch was in charge of the Ethiopian treasury. Well, we just established there were white people and also Israelites living among them. That's why some went to Jerusalem with the Passover, right? But
Yeah.
therefore, it does not mean they were sub-Saharan African. There were Greek-speaking people, Israelites, all kinds of people living there,
Mhm.
right? So they make all kinds of claims, which is just not true, right? Just like Carthage, right? These were, if you look at the statues in modern day Tunisia and the coins, you can see General Hannibal, he was a Greek looking man, right?
Mhm.
And it was these Greeks who went into Europe fighting the Romans, right? These Carthaginians, they fought Romans. But they say, well, Carthage was on the continent of Africa, so they must have been black. But it is just a stupid claim. Right? Even until today, they say, well, Egypt is on the continent of Africa, therefore they must have been black. But Africa was not even used for the entire continent back then, right?
Well, just imagining them in boats is like how, right? Because Carthage was a Phoenician city, right? It was seaports, right? It was Dan who dwelt by the ships and built the boats, and were seafarers, right? So,
Yeah.
uh,
Just like the Queen of Sheba. Sheba, that land was called after a grandson of Ham. So they make the assumption that Sheba was a black queen, but no, of course not, right?
mhm.
They were described as the tallest and fairest of all, right? And they excelled in wisdom and arts and crafts. This is not describing sub-Saharan Africans. I'm sorry, but it's just not, right?
Josephus had an interesting quote in his Antiquities, and he says, "Time has not hurt the name of Cush, because he reigned over those people. So those people were named after him. They were called Cushites too, as
Yeah,
well."
yeah. Because they say, well, Kush means black. So Kush was black, but what people are called after a skin color as a people? That never happens, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's a
Right?
good point. Yeah.
So, yeah, they lived along the fertile regions of the Nile. That was called black soil. They were called after that land, right?
Hmm.
Nothing but skin color, right? There is one guy who said that the Ethiopians, he described them as black, whatever he was trying to say. But that was Theodorus Africanus, but he was from the 16th century. And by the 16th
Oh,
century, everything was already mixed up to the point of
yeah.
uh, that you couldn't recognize it no more, right? But we still find white DNA there. Where do you think that comes from? Why don't they want to acknowledge that, right?
Yeah. So they want to claim Greek ancestry because we know all the statues. We see all the statues of old time with the nose is broken off. We see Cleopatra. We have her bust, right? All the ancient coinage, right, is all causacoid features. Greek coins to coins in Judea. That's really great evidence. But if you see that relationship and bringing up Paul in 1 Corinthians 10:1, he tells these Greeks, he says, "Do not be ignorant, brethren, that our forefathers was in the Exodus together."
Yeah,
That right there is like it's it ties it all together, right? Concerning the Greeks, because we can read like I just want to read this really quick, as far as the Greeks, and see we have extra biblical writings, right? That even we don't need to validate the Bible, but it does it even more so, in my opinion. But this is Diodorus Siculus again, and he says all the foreigners were forthwith expelled, and the most valiant and noble among them, under some notable leaders, were brought to Greece and other places, right? So these Israelites were dispersed into Greece. And it said the most famous of their leaders was Danus, which some people believe is the tribe of Dan, and Cadmus. But the majority of the people descended into a country not far from Egypt, which is called Judea. The leader of that colony was Moses, a very valiant man, Diodorus Siculus' Library of History. And then he goes on to say, they say also that those who set forth in Danus likewise, from Egypt, settled what is practically the oldest city in Argos, Greece, right? And we know the Phoenicians took, the alphabet into Greece, right? So the Israelites were a part of the early Greeks, which makes sense when Paul says our forefathers was in the Exodus together. It all
Yeah.
ties together. So,
Interestingly, if you read the Oerlikon book, old book from the Frisians, which they call a hoax, but it is really the history of the Frisians. You still have in the Netherlands, the northern region, a part called Frisian land, right? And they already described that they had colonies in Greece and on North Africa. There was a marriage with the Egyptian kings already a long time ago. But they even claim that their alphabet predated the Phoenicians. The Phoenician language came even from the Frisians, which were European people with blonde hair.
hmm.
They were already in that Mediterranean region, sailing and you name it.
And a lot of people they forget like Judah. He had Sarah and Perez, and with Tamar, the Hebrew woman. But not only did Perez become a line of kings in Judah, but Zerah, Judah, also became a line of kings. And we see the secular writers talk about Romulus. He went into Rome and then so forth and became a line of kings through Rome. And some say Brutus the Stone in London came from that line, right?
Yeah,
So that's
yeah,
something interesting to look at too.
yeah,
Many migrations, like you said, but there's just,
yeah.
you know,
And also Jeremiah, when he fled, he took the daughters,
yeah.
right? And the Princess Scotia,
Yeah.
he went to Scotland.
Well, when Hezekiah had his eyes plucked out, right? So I think it was King Nebuchadnezzar killed all of his sons, right? But he didn't take account his daughters, right? Queen
Yeah,
Teti. So Jeremiah took his daughters, according to legend, and went into Ireland, in which today they believe they have Jeremiah's tomb in
yeah,
Ireland. You can look at it online. And that name, Jeremy, it's a popular name in Ireland, which comes from Jeremiah.
yeah, yeah. There are even inscriptions in that tomb speaking about how Jeremiah sailed over from Egypt into Ireland, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's so fascinating and
Yeah.
interesting.
But a lot of black people claim, no, the earliest Bible and were Ethiopian and we were the Egyptians. But funny enough, all these black Hebrew Israelites, none of them is even genetically Ethiopian or Egyptian. They are all Western African,
So
right? So they always want to identify themselves with Ethiopians because they look blackish, but they are not even related to these people, right? And secondly, when they say the earliest Bible was in Ethiopia, notice that true. The earliest scriptures is also from the fourth, fifth century, and it was basically after that part was still part of the Roman Empire, and there were still white people living there who needed to hear the gospel, right? These
Amen.
disappeared and got absorbed within the black gene pool, right? But they are therefore not the true Israelites. But you hear these light brown skinned Ethiopians making the claim that they are the true Israelites, but you have no historical evidence or they have nothing to show for, right? Even the buildings. Do you know the church in Ethiopia? It's like 1,000 feet high, carved out of a rock. When you go in there, you see all these angels and saints. They are depicted as white people, right?
Ethiopian scribes sitting beside each other, writing stuff down.
Yeah, yeah.
You
And
know,
sometimes you see brownish people with black hair also depicted, indicating there were already,
yeah.
again, these two races living there,
Hmm.
right? But the Christianity did not start in Ethiopia. Ethiopia was part of the Roman Empire. Many people don't know that. Even that church built out of the ground in the rock in the form of a cross, which they claim angels built it, but it's filled with white symbology, crosses, swastikas, everything,
Yeah.
right? So people don't understand that it was not sub-Saharan Africans who built all that because they had no connection to Christianity whatsoever, right? Just like which apostle they say went to India?
Thomas.
Was that Thomas? Yeah. Even if that's true, that wouldn't pose a problem to our thesis at all because we know that India used to be also in the European civilization, right?
Yeah.
Even in
The
India,
Brahma, the Brahma, right? Or the Veda. Their books is the Veda or the
yeah,
Brahma.
yeah,
The-
Brahma comes from Abraham,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Even Buddha was a wise man. He
Hmm.
wrote about the Aryan way,
Hmm.
described as a man with blue eyes, even though they made him look more Mongol, right?
Yeah,
Or more like a Mongolian or more Indian, but they kept the blue eyes. Right?
yeah.
So I think it's very important for the listeners also to understand that we used to live in the Levant, North Africa. We have all this evidence, right?
Hmm.
And also, these Black Hebrew Israelites, they say, you can't be the Israelites because white people cannot live in the desert, right? First of
Yeah,
all, Israel is on average, what, 72 degrees, right?
yeah.
I live in Texas. It is hot as hell here in the summer. And
Mm.
I survive, right? So why is it so hard to understand? Even though they became darker of skin because of the sun, right? But
White Africans live there today. There's white people that literally live in South Africa today,
yeah.
right? It's such a
So
ridiculous argument.
who do you say that Black Hebrew Israelites claim that Esau and Jacob were?
So it's very disturbing, and this is one reason why I put a lot of attention into this to try to wake up fellow, kindred, right? Because it's a very dangerous theology, and it's aimed at white people, right? Because of we know that Jacob and Esau, they were two twins in the womb of Isaac and Rebekah. Well, Rebekah's wife, they were twins, and it says that Esau came out hairy like a skin. It says in the Greek Septuagint, so he was hairy. But they make this claim that he was red all over, therefore he was albino. They call us the pink man all the time, and really they're complimenting us because that's
Yeah,
us showing
it's
blood in the
ready.
face like Adam. It only
Yeah,
proving the point,
yeah,
right? But Esau, we know we can look further down, Genesis 36, where he intermingled later on. But originally Esau was white, just like Jacob. They were both Syrian, but they
yeah.
teach that Esau, enemy of God, lived in the caves, all this stuff, and he was the father of the Caucasian race. And they believe that they will gain dominion and they're coming out of the cursings and now they're going to have the blessings
Yeah.
and they're going to roll over the white man who
Yeah.
has
Payback time,
suppressed
they
them for
say.
so many years.
Payback time, right?
Yeah, payback time. That's exactly how they think.
So they
Right?
believe that Jacob was black sub-Saharan African, and Esau got a skin disease, and he's the father of the white race, right?
Mhm.
But
And
but
yeah,
that contradicts everything they believe, because on the one hand, they say Jacob, Israel cannot be white because white people cannot live in the desert. At the same time, they call us Esau, the Edomites, who lived
yeah,
in the most hottest
it's
part in the Middle
contradictory.
East.
It's contradictory. And Isaac, let's see, Rebecca, her brother's name was Laban. Laban means white, right? And they were Syrian. And Jacob, no, Laban told Jacob, "You are flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone," right? And we read in Isaiah 29, verse 22, where Jacob waxed pale. When we, as white people, right, a healthy countenance, we show blood in the face, but when we become frightened as a ghost, our blood vessels restrict in our face and we grow pale. You don't see them growing pale. It's us that can wax pale, grow pale.
Yeah.
You know?
Black people don't blush or nor get pale. That is, I think God put that on us because it shows us we are ashamed. And I remember, uh,
Yeah.
especially as a child, when you did something naughty, right? I remember stealing a bag of marbles.
You feel the fire go down you when you get
Oh,
caught?
I got red as you know. But what I noticed with black people, when they get caught doing something, you don't see them blushing or meaning you don't see them have regret or being ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
They get angry because they get caught, but you don't see shame in there. Have you
Nope.
noticed that as well?
For instance, that Chris Hansen, that predatory show where they bring guys in for young age girls, and there was a juice. I'll just use that term, and he just kept on eating his pizza. He didn't blush, but you would notice, because we make mistakes too. But at least we blush, right? We feel convicted, right, for the
Yeah.
most part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do notice that.
So a thing like identity theft, what they're doing, I don't think God is going to be very pleased with that. But you can even see that these black Hebrew Israelites have no shame whatsoever stealing the
Mm.
identity. Because don't you think that at least some of them know it's not true, but they keep pushing it anyway because they just hate our history?
What it is, Afrocentrics has designed a mythology of a past that never was to help the self-esteem of black Americans. Many of them they do not, right? And this is spreading to the British, right? I've seen British black men. William Shakespeare was a black man, and they're all walking to the museum. And I guess it's a feeling of belonging or something like that. They wear the purple Power Rangers and they have the balls and all those things. You know, to me,
But they're
when I
all they're
see
all
it,
Nigerian, and
yeah,
yeah.
mhm, yep.
I told them last week, why don't you do a DNA test and you can see what part of Africa you're from? But he refuses because that will destroy the whole narrative.
Not to mention, a lot of them have white DNA as well.
Yeah, because they have been living in North America, there
Mhm,
has been some intermixing going on,
mhm,
right? Some have up to 25%.
mhm.
And the funny thing is, the more European DNA they have, the more they are being put forward as being the handsome black or look at the Halle Berry, for example. The
Yeah,
black people
totally
are very
mixed.
proud of her that she is so pretty,
Totally mixed.
but she's a white mother.
They're heroes. Muhammad Ali, Nordic. He had Nordic DNA. Malcolm X had
Yeah.
20% white. All their
Bob
heroes.
Marley.
There you go.
Yeah. And isn't it funny because they hate white supremacy, but the more white DNA they carry, the more they become white supremacists towards the black
Yeah,
ones.
pretty much. Yeah.
Because basically they worship by DNA. Because you even see now these AI pictures of black Egyptian and black Jesus, and they portray him with blue eyes and lighter skin.
Yeah.
So what do you want? Are you proud to be black, or is it more beneficial to look more Caucasian to you? Right? It is really
It's almost like
crazy to think about.
they have no identity, so I guess they're just trying to make it up as they go, right? That's the only conclusion that I can come with, you know.
Yeah,
It self-esteem issues.
yeah. Just like they portray Jesus. Did we talk about the woolly hair yet?
I think we did Revelation chapter 1. I want to say that we did.
Okay, because they portray Jesus as an aging 80-year-old black man with white hair.
Um, Another one that they like to use Jeremiah. There's a few uh, verses in Jeremiah, and they love to cherry pick these verses. Like for one, we'll just say like Jeremiah 8:21. For the hurt of the daughter of my people, I am hurt. I am black. Astonishment has taken a hold of me. Right. So these ideas of the word black, it means to mourn, to cause to mourn. The Bible is a transliteration, right? You're going from
Yeah.
Hebrew to English, so they take whatever they can find on the English side, and that's what you get. But that word quadar means to mourn in sackcloth, and we read that in the beginning of Jeremiah. You will mourn in sackcloth, right? And clothe yourself in sackcloth. To be dim, to grow dark, right? Jeremiah 4:8, for this, clothe yourself with sackcloth and mourn and wail, for the fierce anger of the Lord has not turned back from us, right? This was the judgment of God, like the cursings and blessings in Deuteronomy 28, which they also take Deuteronomy 28 and say, we were in slavery for 400 years and evil white man, right?
Yeah.
But technically, in Deuteronomy 28, it was 215 years from when Abraham came into the land of Canaan, and then another 215 years from when Abraham left, right? And that would make the 430 years. So they wasn't, these Israelites
Yeah.
wasn't in slavery for
That
400.
already happened a long time ago.
It had already happened a long time ago, right?
Plus, it says you will seek to be sold, and no one will buy you.
No one will buy you. And the
So
transatlantic
how does
slaves,
that?
what, 80 million were sold in the transatlantic slave trade?
Yeah, people standing in line to buy them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but black, it has so many um, different ways of reading it in context, right? It can refer to skin color, it can refer to mourning, but also, for example, you have the Black Madonna. That doesn't mean that Madonna was a black man. It has an occultic symbolism, right? And also, do you remember when Putin came out
How
and
can I
revealed
forget?
the true identity of Jesus? Remember
Yeah.
that?
Hmm.
And then you saw these old pictures where the paint was all getting dark, but you could clearly see
Straight,
Caucasian features,
skinny
little mouth. Yeah,
noses.
yeah. But they ran away with it and
Hmm.
combined it with AI pictures. It was just horrible. But
Oh, and that's what I meant about, they are purposely dishonest because some of those AI photos, I scanned them and looked for the original, like of the Mary, and they added features. They purposely add features on these original photos, right? And
yeah,
so,
wow. Yeah, just like the Moors, right? The Moors, you've seen the old paintings, the old drawings. They were white skinned, red hair, right?
wow,
They became Islamic and they converted to Berbers. And you can still go to Morocco where the Berbers live. You can still see blonde hair, blue eyes, right?
wow.
But yeah, it is very well documented that the Muslims, the Arabs, who were still white back then, even Muhammad, by the way, was described as a white man, whiter than milk, with a red beard, right?
Yeah.
You see the pictures of the dark-skinned Arabs
Mm.
dyeing their beards red with henna to look like Muhammad,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it's well documented that they went into deeper Africa and used black people as slaves, right? And they were indeed among the Moors. But the other claim they make, the Moors, the black Moors ruled Europe, right? You see it all day long. Now they did not rule Europe at all, right? The Moors, they ruled Spain for a while, right? Because the
Yeah.
the Sephardic Edomites, they opened the doors for the Islamic invasions to come in, but they were the majority white. I've seen the pictures how they played chess together. A white man with a Moor. They were both white, right? But they started to mix up over time. And now you see that the modern day brown Arabs, they all have sub-Saharan African DNA because of that intermixing, right? Because Islam doesn't make any distinction between races, right? Um, that's why everything is so mixed. Islam is basically a universal message, but we're talking about a covenant here, a biblical story about the Indo-European people, right? Who
Hmm.
branched off, right? So the biblical message is not like Islam. They try to make it into a same universal message, right?
Hmm. Peace and love, a religion of peace and
Yeah,
love.
inclusion,
Yeah.
equality, right?
Hmm.
So Now, Islam is already a long time ago a failed religion, right? Used by the enemy to get rid of the pure Adamic people. And fortunately, there are still Adamic people, but they're going down in numbers really fast.
Even taking on that Arab religion, right? Our own kindred are taking on the religion of Islam, right?
Yeah, you see that now, so that's crazy. Yeah,
And you know the Quran, written 600 years after the New Testament, right? Made up of Gnostics and Arab, right? To grow darker,
yeah,
to
yeah,
mix, to become like evening.
yeah, yeah.
So,
A lot of people don't know that the Hebrew word for Arab indeed means to grow darker, to become,
hmm
yeah, to grow darker. That's exactly what happened to the Arab people, right?
hmm
But isn't it strange that the Americans they were taken into North America? By the way, it was a small part of the whole slave trade. Most went to South America, by the way, right? But okay, they are in America. They were enslaved. The slavery was abolished, right? The white people still understood, okay, well, they're free, but let's keep each other separate, right? But it was deemed evil. We had the Jim Crow era that had to be done away with. Now you had the human rights. But now, today, black people, they have been given equality, even DEI. Um, I don't know any black man who is being discriminated against. We have black mayors now. We have black people in politics, right? In high positions in the army, right? So I don't see it. But don't you think it's kind of strange that now that they have all this opportunity, all this freedom, that they turn against us, and not just about us currently, but the entire history?
yeah, it's ungratefulness. It almost seems like Jacob's trouble, like when you look at the Bible, right? It almost seems, and it's like, have we done this to ourselves? I guess so, but I think it's good to see it, right? Because now, it gives us understanding and it lets us learn, right, of who they are truly, right? So we can move forward. But at the same time, we have to get God on our side because our nations are being overrun with people who are ungrateful. They want to steal our history, they want to steal our culture, they want to steal our lineage, they want to steal our lands, they want to make us feel guilty, right? As they go through our stores and buy the stuff and look, you know, like I said, I've walked through these places. Some people don't feel it, right? Because they live in little small towns and they don't see it. But there's going to become a day when they will. But you walk through these major cities and it's like Babylon, right? Babylon literally means confusion by mixing. When you mix cultures, languages, religions, these people are not budging from their religion, they're not budging from their culture. And what they do when they come in droves, they stick to their own people. They don't assimilate, right?
Yeah,
And they stick in their groups and their groups get bigger, bigger, bigger. And it's a mix match, right?
yeah,
So you know,
yeah. I
yeah.
think I
So
think their unwillingness to assimilate is a protection from God. Because can you imagine if they 100% assimilate,
yeah,
then
that's
what
true. Yeah.
what will your daughters do? They will come home with
Yeah.
them, right? And now your grandchildren don't look like you, and many people think that's offensive. But I think it's more offensive that we have been so irresponsible. We have been trying to be good to everybody,
Yeah.
and now they are rejoicing and screaming in the streets, "We are Edom. We need to be destroyed. The day
Yeah.
of reckoning is coming."
We've been the most gracious out of all other peoples to allow them to come into our countries, but they call us evil colonizers and wicked, and you have the biggest death toll of any human being. You would still be in the Stone Age, and they say that as they use our internet, use our phone, and then when they say we have no culture, while they're totally engulfed in our culture, using our language in two-story homes, driving our vehicles, and so forth, wearing clothes, not walking. The Philippines in the 1900s, the women were still walking around without any clothes,
Yeah,
walking around with their boobs hanging out, and in National Geographics and stuff like that. So it's a shame to see what's happening to our white Christian nations who have been the most blessed nations upon the earth.
yeah. And now you see black Hebrew wannabe Israelites shouting in the streets with the King James Bible in the English language. Do they even realize? Because what I see is many black people, they speak English because they were born in America, but somehow they don't realize that they are speaking a white language and reading a white man's Bible, translated by white men for the white man. So it's crazy that they say this is our book, but if it's your book, why is there no African Bible? I'm
Yeah.
talking about Ethiopian Bible. Why is there a Western African Bible? If they, because they say, and that's crazy, because I talked to one of the Black Hebrew Israelites, it's on my channel, and he made the claim, well, we were brought from Western Africa as slaves, but all the slaves were taken about out of Nigeria. They were the Israelites. So somehow the slave traders could make a distinction between the black Israelites and the real Nigerians, even though they look exactly similar before they started to mix in North America. But somehow they knew the difference.
This is the problem too, because so the Northern Kingdom was taken out right around 750 BC, right, and it was taken into Assyria captivity. But then you had the Babylonian captivity, which was 550 BC. But Ezra chapter 2 verse 64 says only 40,000 went into Judea, right? So only 40,000 Judahites, real Judahites, Israelites. And this is also where we get the Babylonian Talmud, but that's another story. But when they went into Judea, you also had Edom there. You had Canaanites there. You had Hittites there, right? You had all these mixed groups who, according to John Hyrcanus, and Josephus wrote about, converted these groups. But see, these Israelite or these wannabe Israelites, they call themselves Jew today, right? But the migrations all happened with the northern kingdom who went out of Assyria. According to the census of David, there was around 20 million Israelites. Josephus said that the Israelites were unnumerous in number, that two of the tribes were subject to the Romans while the 10 tribes were past the Euphrates. Second Ezra said they went past the Euphrates. First Kings 14 through 15 said they are beyond the Euphrates, right? So all these tribes, the majority, they didn't go into West Africa. They went past the Euphrates. And in
Yeah, they
Second
went
Ezra,
north. Yeah,
yeah, it's ridiculous. And that's exactly where Paul went. And where did the gospel go? That should be enough right there. It went, where did it go? Where did it
yeah.
thrive?
All
It
the
went
churches
to
were in
white
Europe.
nation.
Yeah, that black Hebrew Israelite I talked to, um, he knew about the Assyrian deportations and the Bible and also other sources. We can trace them to the northern part of Assyria, right? They lived next to the Medes, the Persians, and they went more north. But according to him, yes, the lost tribes were taken away by the Assyrians up north, but then they found a special route south into Africa. But it means they had to go through the Babylonian Empire, another
Yeah, I have to go
enemy.
backward. It makes no
Why,
sense.
why would you flee to an enemy area?
It makes no sense.
And then they like to show that old map from the 15th century, where in Africa, Central Africa, you have a place called the Kingdom of Judah, and it is their proof that the true Israelites went to Africa. But if you look at earlier maps, that same area was called the Kingdom of Ayuda. That means help in Portuguese. It was a Portuguese
Eh,
colony. Portuguese called it the Kingdom of Ayuda, but then later they took away the A, and now it seems like Kingdom of Judah, right? It is another claim easily debunked, right?
Well,
But you just have to do a little research. Uh, have you heard the claim that Mozart was black?
yeah.
Well, I did some research. It turns out there was a dark man, whether he was Arab or mixed or a servant or whatever
Yeah.
he was
Yes. Hmm.
in the 18th century or something. Mozart lived much earlier, but he was very talented in piano playing, right? Because you can teach black people anything, right? They, I mean, you can teach them anything, right? So you can teach them how to learn a piano, which they did, and they made. I know some really great black musicians, right? But besides that, because he was pretty talented, they nicknamed him the
Black.
Black Mozart.
Yeah.
I have a friend in Holland. He's a very talented guitar player. He's very talented, and he's pretty well known. And they call him the Dutch Steve Vai.
Stevie Ray, right? Stevie Ray
Steve,
Vaughan?
Steve Vai.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So, but it doesn't mean he is Steve Vai. It is a nickname, and it was the same thing with the Black Mozart, right?
Yeah.
They see anything, they run away with it, right? Anything, as long as is proof that Europeans were ruled by the Black Moors. I heard even some go so far to claim that the blacks built the cathedrals and they built all the cities. They built Rome, Paris, London, the cathedrals, the German cities.
And why
And
aren't they doing that today? Did all these things.
yeah,
Why aren't they doing that today? Why don't
yeah.
we see that pattern? And these archaeologists were talking about the pyramids, and they said it's kind of hard to believe that they built the pyramids because the fruits don't match, and we don't see that as innovators, right? Inventors. We don't see that spirit within them, right? Explorers, right? We've been explorers. We've touched the four corners of the earth. We've built and designed and done all these things. We just don't see those fruits in them.
And how come that archaeology started always white with white men, German archaeologists, English archaeologists? Why was it never black people who did archaeology? Never.
We have
Maybe
that
now in
curiosity.
2026, maybe there are
Yeah.
some black people who go along with archaeological projects, but why didn't they never had that zeal to find, go to Egypt, excavate there? It was always white people who did that.
That shows you that we're just different species of people. I hate to put it in that way, but uh, that's who we are. We have that curiosity. We have that spark. We want to know. We want what is that, right? And it's
So the true Hebrews, the true Israelites were divorced, like you said, taken into Assyria. But the promise was that God will not forget, even though they forgot who they were, God will not forget about them. And one day they will be reconciled, right?
Mhm.
I
And it
will
says
go.
it says that we would forget Deuteronomy. It says that we would forget, and our memory would cease from men.
Yeah. So, but the reconciliation happened in Christ.
Amen.
Christ reconciled us back to the Father. That happened in the first century. So
Amen.
how come that it never happened to black Africans? Because they say, well, we were slaves in Egypt and basically have been slaves ever since. So for thousands of years, even until today, they are just slaves. Where is the reconciliation? Where is the regathering? Right? I mean, they talk about the curses. Where are the blessings? Like
That's it.
you were talking about Deuteronomy 28. Yes, it describes blessings, but also it describes curses, but also blessings. Where are their blessings? God's people were just in curses for the whole existence?
Mm-hmm.
Of course not, right? And that these things should be enough to understand from wow, these black Hebrew Israelites are just wannabes.
And I remember a time when one of their famous quotes was Christianity, that's the white man's religion. I used to always hear that, but now,
Yeah.
nope.
Muhammad Ali said it too. I don't want to be a Christian. That's the religion of my oppressor. So he became
Yeah.
Muhammad Ali. Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali. He became Muslim, not realizing that these Muslims started this whole thing.
Yeah.
They were the biggest slave traders of all.
Yeah, and it's still happening today.
Yeah.
It's still happening today.
And that's proof that black people don't hate white people because of the slavery. Because if it really was about slavery, they would hate the Arabs even more. But they don't. They like the Arabs. They even convert to their religion. So it's the slavery is just an excuse. I think they hated us uh, even before Egypt, but Egypt is one of the oldest records we have that they were already in enmity against the Egyptians, right?
Do you think it could be envy, like almost like the cargo cult ideology, right? Because like for instance, when we was in South Africa, there's a few documentaries where we put them to work, right? We were mining all those diamonds, and eventually they became envious, right? They saw all the stuff that we were doing, and they should have been grateful enough that because they couldn't, they didn't know how to manage their own resources, right? They didn't know how to do
They
with
didn't even know
anything.
it was there.
They didn't even know it was there, and then they became envious, right? As I saw in this documentary, and they wanted it all. But now you see in South Africa, right? Kill the farmer while they're starving, and you see certain black folk coming forward, like, please bring back the white man. At least we had jobs, right? But it's that same ideology. Like I think it was in a video I think you've seen of Zephyr, where they would see the white man in the airplane, and then they would think that they were the gods, and then build
Yeah,
sick
bamboo.
airplanes. Yeah,
Yeah,
right. And like you're taking what's ours, right? That it's
yeah.
like almost like an envious spirit.
It's the same thing with these videos you see of black girls beating up white girls because the white girls
Yeah,
want braids, right?
yeah,
Even though we find mummies thousands of years old of white women with
yeah.
braids, right?
Egyptian ones too.
Yeah, yeah. But they call white girls wearing braids cultural appropriation. But at the same time, black women wear wigs, even
Yep,
blonde wigs.
yep,
How is that not appropriation?
yep. Yet we
Right?
have no culture, but they want to copy it, right? With the wigs, the blonde hair, and
Well, you hear black people in America claim, well, we invented, the other day someone said we invented the doorknob. But in order to invent a doorknob, you must have a door. And in Africa, they didn't have doors in these mud huts, right? So even if it's true that black men invented peanut butter, which is not true because it has been used in Indonesia for thousands of years. But let's say, okay, black people in America invented the rocking chair and the doorknob and peanut butter, right? That still means that they came up with ideas while living in our society.
yeah.
Because if they
It,
are really these great inventors, why are there no inventions in Africa? Why didn't they even have a wheel when the Europeans came there, right?
and where's their car, right? Why haven't they invented? They don't even have a car in Africa, right? Nothing. There's no.
Yeah, but we built the pyramids. No, you're not Egyptian.
Yeah.
We're talking about West Africans. Nothing to do with Egyptians.
Even the Egyptians there today are just more than panhandlers, right? That they're not innovative people either,
No,
right?
they're
Even
living off the ruins from what was
yeah.
once there. Yeah,
Mhm.
I hear these black people always say in debates, "Well, we built the pyramids, and you guys still haven't figured out how we did it." And I would in that situation ask, "Okay, well, you as a black man, explain it then. How did you do it?"
Yeah.
Because he acts like they have all this knowledge. Well, tell us, how did you build the pyramids, right? So, and now you have all these AI videos of black people carrying, because they were superhuman, carrying those big
Yeah.
blocks. And yeah,
The AI stuff's a little bit problematic too because of our youth. That's why it's good to get some as much of this truth out as possible because our youth are being brainwashed, and who else is behind it in the shadows helping push this garbage, right?
yeah.
And
Well, it's funny. There were some developers who created AI information tools, and all these AI programs had access to all known knowledge. Turns out they became racist.
wow.
That
Oh
AI
yeah,
was
yeah,
basically
yeah,
saying what
yeah,
we say.
yeah. They had to reprogram it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they have to put restrictions on there because
yeah.
it was going against the humanistic narrative.
But something I want to point out too, like when you're looking at languages, and like far as like the Hebrew and the Gaelic, uh, these languages are interchangeable almost, right? The words are very similar. And also, like William Tyndale, he was a famous Bible translator. He said that the Hebrew and the English, unlike the Latin, translate word for word.
Yeah.
Uh, if you look at the Sanskrit, the Hebrew, and the English, all like word father, mother, all have similar words, right? But if you
Mama,
look at
Papa, yeah.
Yeah, all of it's similar. It shows a relationship, right? It shows we were one people, right? But you look at African languages, right, or
The-
Chinese language,
the-
yeah, the clucking bush people, right?
yeah,
The Chinese language, it is called monosyllabic. I think their language is called, but those bear no relationship. That
yeah,
shows that we have no kindred with them, right?
yeah, yeah,
And Africans, like from they only had a subtle colors, right? They had their mathematical system was either a little or a lot, no alphabet, and not articulate whatsoever. No writing. They have no written history whatsoever, like us. We've written everything down, since the very beginning.
yeah. That's why they have to claim they were the Greeks. I've seen
Yeah.
AI pictures where a black man was teaching Plato his knowledge because he was Egyptian and he taught Plato, right? And
Oh gosh.
it's ridiculous. But we do this not out of unreasonable hate, or we think it's really important to make our people understand our history because in a few decades we will be a despised minority,
Yeah,
and our children will have no longer any link to their identity, and the world is not going to getting any better after that, right?
that's it.
So, David, thank you so much for your inbreng today, and I hope our listeners picked up a thing
Yeah.
or two also from the beautiful quotes you had from the Greek historians. Is there anything else you wanted to add to this?
I just wanted to leave you guys with this and just really think about this. Who has carried the gospel to the four corners of the globe? Who sent missionaries? Who's printed the Bibles? Who has become a nation and a company of nations, right? Great Britain owned the world besides 22 countries. These were Christian dominant nations, right? And another nation came out of her, the United States, another founded on Christianity, right? Look who's carried the names Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, right? Where did the gospel go? Where did it thrive? Who built the civilizations? Right? All in one mind. We need to get back to that one mind, one spirit, one accord, one body of Christ. If we do that, nothing can stop us. Because if God be for us, who
Who
can
can be
be
against
against
us?
us?
Amen. Yeah.
All of this stuff, all this garbage, and all these outsiders who's taking advantage of us and bringing in their false gods and all that, we can do away with all that if we all come together in unity as kindred, realizing who we are. Because if we know who we are, it doesn't matter what they believe, right? If God is for us, who can be against us? So I just want to leave with that. And thanks for having me on here, brother. It was good having a conversation with you.
Great stuff, David. And maybe we can do another video because there's more topics we can talk
Yeah,
about. But
sounds good. Sounds good.
I really appreciate your time today.
All right, sounds good, brother. God bless.
God bless.